ELI5 Why America was not discovered by navigating the Bering Strait. There's a lot of responses here, so this will probably be lost in the mix. Trying to keep my explanation like a 5-year-old, mostly because I'm no expert in the subject, but the way I understand it is people before Columbus had discovered Americas through the Bering Strait. But since the strait wasn't easily accessed all the time, they became their own population and for the most part was lost to the previous connections. When Europe came, they colonized, making very regular contact and communication. This took the Americas and put them on what was the map of the known world. Very early migration across that connection was responsible for the native cultures that were already in the New World. As for later exploration, I think a big part of it was just that there weren't big societies stretching their borders in Siberia. I bet money if you went back in time and talked to the ice-tracking cultures that did live there, they probably did know that there was more on either side. But we don't really have any history books written by them, and Asian and European cultures were all pretty centered on themselves at the time. Part of it is the definition of discovered. Columbus' main achievement was that he made the existence of these Americas known to the royalty of Europe, which had profound historical results. Other people discovered it earlier, but without the same effects. The other part is that until quite recently seas were easier to traverse than land. We tend to think of land as easy to travel across, add water as a barrier. But 500 years ago the reverse was true. It would have been easier to sail the Atlantic than cross Siberia. Actually, people did cross the Bering Strait, just not by boat. Thousands of years ago, during the Ice Age, the Bering Strait was a land bridge. Early humans walked across it from Asia to America. As for why no one sailed across in recent history, it's because it's super far north, freezing cold, and surrounded by rough, icy waters. Not exactly a cruise, you know? Columbus and others sailed the long way because they were trying to find a sea route to Asia, not knowing America was in the way. So I am going to ignore the people referencing the land bridge. There is evidence that the Alaskan natives and their close relatives on the other side of the strait did trade and knew each other. The Aleutian and Yupik, for instance. If you are asking why people who wrote history didn't know about the Bering Strait, Imperial Russia probably did, as they founded a lot of cities in Alaska. The rest of Europe had no reason to transverse North America, then transverse Siberia. Well, the ancestors of Native Americans did cross it when it was a land bridge. The part of Siberia near the Bering Strait is remote and sparsely populated and wasn't even explored by Russia until the 1600s. The people indigenous to that region were not in the business of world exploration or establishing colonies. For the European powers who had an interest in exploration, for example Spain, France, Britain, crossing the Atlantic was the shorter route to the Americas. So, the Eurocentric BS you've been fed is that America was discovered by some Spaniard. However, people were here tens of thousands of years before that from Asia. Also, hundreds of years before that from the UK region or Iceland or Greenland. But just because Europe didn't know about America didn't mean it hadn't been discovered long before they arrived. It was originally discovered that way. That's how the Native Americans arrived about 10-20,000 years ago. I don't know the answer to your actual question though. Maybe the East Asians didn't have ships that can handle the cold seas of the Arctic. Most of the Bering Strait and its nearby regions are in the Arctic Circle, and are very inhospitable to human settlements and ocean travel. No one thought to cross over because hardly anyone was living and traveling that far north in the first place. Heck, look at how sparsely populated all of Siberia still is today. The question might be, can you really discover when there are already people living there? Europeans didn't know America existed until Columbus went there in 1492, because they forgot about Ericsson 400 years earlier. And crossing Siberia might be harder than crossing the Atlantic. It's very difficult terrain. If you discover a place that is not special, you can tell people about it, but they might not care. The far north has a lot of snow and a low population density. Maybe North America was discovered, but people who wrote things down didn't care that much. Bering Straits. It was discovered, but not by the I am going to find new lands and come back and tell other types. Also, cold and not too hospitable on the Siberian side, more of the same on the Alaska side. Not much to write home about. Kind of related, America was also discovered by Polynesians. There is some very interesting DNA evidence going both ways, and sweet potatoes seems to have come from the Americas and moved west long before America was discovered. There is some thought that Chinese explorers visited North America before Columbus, more the Pacific coast than the Bering Strait, though. Google is your friend. There's also speculation that Polynesians visited South America. Who are you referring to? There is substantial evidence to support the claim that trade between Siberian and Inuit people occurred, possibly long distance. There is some debate over beads found that might be Venetian. An important thing to note is that history as Western counties is typically taught from the Western perspective. We think of it being discovered the way it was, because that is when Western Europeans discovered it. It was. Do Native Americans not count or something? I always thought it was funny that Columbus was credited with discovering America even though there were already people across the entire continent. You are looking at it on through Eurocentric lenses. The Native Americans you see came from Asia via Bering Strait and lived there long before Europeans discovered the Americas. It was. Well, in fact it was not by navigating, it was by walking. 20k years later we killed those fuckers and rewrote history with us being the ones who discovered America. Probably some Asians were aware of the existence of Alaska or other parts of Western North America before Columbus or Leif Erikson, but had no idea it was undiscovered. History is a lie. Nothing happened the way we are told and everything you think you know is wrong. Knowledge is power and we have none.